Have you ever wondered why some people can lose everyone around them and still remain calm, while others fall apart the moment someone stops texting back, stops caring, or walks away? Imagine waking up tomorrow and realizing that every person you depended on for happiness has suddenly disappeared. No messages, no validation, no applause, just silence. Would you still know who you are? Most people think heartbreak begins when someone leaves. But according to the Stoics, heartbreak begins much earlier. It begins the moment you hand someone else the keys to your own worth, and almost nobody realizes they're doing it until it's too late. Marcus Aurelius once reminded himself that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. If your thoughts constantly revolve around earning love from others, eventually your entire identity becomes dependent on their approval. That is how people lose themselves without ever noticing. Stay with me, because before this video ends, you will understand why. Loving yourself is not selfish. It is the foundation of every meaningful relationship, every achievement, every peaceful night, and every fearless decision you will ever make. More importantly, you will discover why the people who love themselves, most often become the people everyone else respects. There was once a young man who believed his purpose in life was making everyone happy. Every morning he checked his phone hoping someone needed him. Every decision was influenced by what other people might think. He changed his personality to fit different groups. He laughed at jokes he didn't find funny, agreed with opinions he secretly disagreed with, and stayed in relationships that slowly destroyed his confidence. Because being alone terrified him more than being unhappy. At first, people appreciated his kindness. They called him generous, thoughtful, dependable. But over time, something strange happened. The more he sacrificed himself, the less people valued him. They began expecting more while giving less. His kindness became an obligation instead of a gift. His availability became invisible. His love became taken for granted. One day, the person he loved most looked him in the eyes and said, "I just don't feel the same anymore." In that single sentence, years of emotional investment collapsed. He wasn't just losing a relationship, he was losing the only identity he had built for months. He blamed himself. Maybe I wasn't enough. Maybe if I had tried harder. Maybe if I looked different, earned more money, became more successful, everything would have worked. But then an old mentor asked him one simple question: who were you before you started living for everyone else? He couldn't answer. That silence changed everything, because he finally realized he had spent years learning how to love other people without ever learning how to love himself. This is where Stoicism begins. Stoicism does not teach you to stop loving others. It teaches you never to abandon yourself in the process. Think about how much energy people spend chasing acceptance. They work harder to impress strangers than they do understanding themselves. They scroll endlessly, comparing their lives with perfect images online. They measure success by likes, promotions, compliments, relationships, and external achievements. Yet the Stoics warned about this almost 2,000 years ago. Epictetus explained that suffering begins whenever we attach our happiness to things outside our control. Read that again. Not when we lose those things. When we become attached to them, that changes everything, because the problem isn't love. The problem isn't ambition. The problem isn't success. The problem is dependence. Dependence quietly steals your freedom. When your confidence depends on compliments, someone else controls your emotions. When your peace depends on another person's attention, they own your happiness. When your worth depends on achievements, failure becomes unbearable. This is why so many successful people secretly feel empty. They climbed the mountain only to discover they left themselves at the bottom. Perhaps you've experienced this yourself. Maybe someone ignored your message, and suddenly your mind created stories that weren't true. Maybe you were passed over for a promotion and immediately questioned your value. Maybe someone criticized you and one sentence replayed inside your head for weeks. Notice something. The event lasted only a moment. The suffering continued because your mind kept feeding it. Marcus Aurelius believed that external events have no power over us until our judgments give them power. Imagine carrying a backpack filled with rocks. Every criticism becomes another rock. Every rejection, another rock. Every comparison, another rock. Eventually, you convince yourself life is unbearably heavy. But here's the truth. Most of those rocks were picked up voluntarily. You kept carrying opinions that were never yours to carry. You accepted standards created by people who don't even understand their own lives. You measured yourself using rulers built by strangers, and then wondered why nothing ever felt enough. Self-love, according to Stoicism, begins the moment you stop asking the world for permission to respect yourself. That sentence alone can change a life. Because if your value requires approval, then your value will always remain negotiable. Imagine two trees growing side by side. The first tree grows deep roots, reaching far beneath the surface. Storms arrive. The wind bends its branches. Rain floods the ground, but the tree remains standing because its strength comes from within. The second tree looks taller, prettier, and more impressive, but its roots barely touch the earth. When the storm arrives, it falls first. People often mistake appearance for strength. Stoics never did. They cared far more about roots than branches. Your roots are your character, your discipline, your integrity, your self-respect, your ability to remain steady when nobody is watching. Seneca believed that the greatest possession anyone could have was ownership of their own mind, not wealth, not fame, not popularity. Your own mind. Think about that. How many people wake up every morning already controlled by notifications, opinions, headlines, expectations, and comparisons before they even take their first sip of coffee? Their attention belongs to everyone except themselves. No wonder anxiety has become so common. Attention is your life's greatest currency. Where you invest it determines who you become. If every day you invest your attention into proving your worth, you will always feel bankrupt. If instead you invest your attention into becoming someone you admire, your confidence grows naturally. Real confidence is quiet. It doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't argue online. It doesn't chase validation. Simply exists. Have you ever noticed that the people who desperately seek attention rarely receive genuine respect, while those who quietly focus on themselves often become magnetic? That isn't luck, it's psychology. People are naturally drawn toward those who already possess what everyone else is searching for, inner peace. And here's where most people make a devastating mistake. They believe self-love means constantly telling yourself positive affirmations. Looking in the mirror saying you're amazing. Pretending everything is fine. The Stoics would disagree. True self-love isn't built through empty words. It's built through honorable actions. Every promise you keep to yourself strengthens self-respect. Every difficult decision you make, despite fear, strengthens identity. Every healthy habit becomes evidence that you matter. You don't convince yourself you're valuable. You prove it. Imagine promising yourself you'll wake up early tomorrow. Morning arrives, the alarm rings, nobody else is watching. You hit snooze, nothing terrible happens, except something invisible. Trust between you and yourself weakens. Now imagine you wake up anyway. You honor your commitment. Again, nobody notices, except your subconscious. Every promise kept becomes another brick in the foundation of confidence. Confidence isn't something you're born with, it's something you earn from yourself that changes the entire conversation about self-worth, because suddenly confidence no longer depends on talent, appearance, money, or popularity. It depends on integrity, and integrity belongs to everyone willing to practice it. The ancient Stoics constantly trained themselves through discomfort, cold mornings, simple meals, minimal possessions. Not because suffering was noble, because comfort often creates dependence. When you deliberately practice doing difficult things, your mind learns an unforgettable lesson. I can survive more than I thought. That lesson transforms every future challenge. The breakup hurts, but you survive. The rejection stings, but you survive. The failure embarrasses you, but you survive. Eventually, resilience replaces fear, and once resilience replaces fear, something remarkable happens. You stop begging life to become easier. Instead, you become stronger. That's the exact moment people begin loving themselves. Not because life became perfect, because they discovered they could handle imperfection. There is another story worth remembering. An older woman spent decades placing everyone else's needs before her own. She raised children, supported friends, cared for aging parents, worked exhausting jobs, and never complained. Everyone admired her generosity, but privately she felt invisible. Every mirror reminded her of lost years. Every birthday felt like another reminder that she had forgotten herself. One evening she sat alone after everyone had gone. The house was quiet. For the first time in years, she asked herself a frightening question. If nobody needed me anymore, who would I become? That question haunted her for months. Eventually, instead of running from it, she answered it. She started reading. Again, walking every morning, learning new skills, traveling alone, eating healthier, saying no without apologizing. At first, people called her selfish. That word almost stopped her almost. Then she realized something profound. The same people who benefited from her lack of boundaries were the loudest critics when she finally created them. That realization freed her forever. Because not everyone will celebrate your growth, some people only liked a version of you that required less from them. Remember that. It's one of the hardest truths you'll ever accept. When you begin respecting yourself, some relationships naturally disappear. Not because you've become worse, because you've stopped accepting less than you deserve. And this leads us to one of the most misunderstood ideas in Stoicism: love yourself more than anyone else. Many people hear that sentence and immediately think arrogance, ego, selfishness, but they misunderstand entirely. The Stoics never encouraged vanity, they encouraged responsibility. Loving yourself means becoming someone worthy of your own admiration. It means holding yourself accountable when you fail, forgiving yourself without making excuses, protecting your peace without attacking others. Speaking honestly even when lying would be easier, showing kindness without sacrificing dignity. That kind of self-love doesn't push people away. It attracts the right people, while naturally filtering out the wrong ones. And there is one ancient lesson that completely changes how you see every relationship. But before we get there, you must first understand why the people who fear loneliness often end up surrounded by the wrong company, while those who master solitude become impossible to manipulate. Most people spend their entire lives trying to escape loneliness without realizing that loneliness itself is not the enemy. The real enemy is becoming so uncomfortable with your own company that you will accept almost anyone into your life just to avoid silence. The Stoics understood something that modern society often forgets. A person who cannot sit peacefully with themselves will never find lasting peace with anyone else. Think about how many relationships begin from fear rather than love. Fear of being alone, fear of missing out, fear of growing old, fear of feeling unwanted. When fear becomes the foundation, every decision becomes a compromise. You ignore red flags because loneliness feels worse. You tolerate disrespect because abandonment feels unbearable. You silence your own needs because losing someone seems more painful than losing yourself, but eventually the price becomes impossible to ignore. You wake up one morning living a life that doesn't even feel like yours. Epictetus reminded his students that no one can enslave a person whose mind remains free. That statement reaches far beyond politics or physical freedom. It speaks directly to emotional independence. The moment your happiness depends entirely on another person's choices, you hand them invisible power over your emotional world. They don't even have to intend it. One delayed message changes your mood. One cold conversation ruins your entire day. One compliment makes you feel valuable. One criticism makes you question everything. Your emotional weather constantly changes because someone else controls the forecast. Stoicism invites you to reclaim that control. Imagine standing beside the ocean. The waves never ask your permission before arriving. Some are calm, some are violent. You cannot stop them, but you can decide whether to build your home on the sand or on solid ground. External events are the waves. Your character is the foundation. The stronger the foundation, the less the storm matters. Marcus Aurelius lived during war's plague, political betrayal, and unimaginable pressure. Yet in his private journal, he kept returning to one simple truth. Your mind belongs to you, not the emperor, not the crowd, not your enemies, not even your closest friends. Only you decide what enters your inner world. Today, that lesson is more important than ever. Every notification competes for your attention. Every advertisement tells you that you are incomplete. Every social media platform profits by convincing you that someone else's life is better than yours. Comparison has become a daily habit, but comparison quietly destroys self-respect because it forces you to measure your behind-the-scenes life against someone else's highlight reel. The Stoics would ask a different question. Instead of asking whether you are ahead of someone else, ask whether you are becoming a better version of yesterday's self. That is the only comparison worth making. Real growth rarely looks dramatic. Sometimes it means reacting with patience instead of anger. Sometimes it means keeping your word when nobody would notice if you broke it. Sometimes it means walking away from people who only value you when you sacrifice your peace. Those moments rarely receive applause, yet they quietly transform your identity. Imagine a blacksmith forging a sword. The steel enters the fire again and again. Each time it is heated, hammered, cooled, and reshaped. From the outside, the process looks harsh, but every strike removes weakness. Every flame increases strength. Human character develops the same way. Pain is not always punishment. Often, it is preparation. Think back to the hardest season of your own life. At the time, you probably asked why. Why did this happen? Why me? Why now? Months or years later, you often discover something unexpected. The experience changed you. It taught boundaries. It revealed fake friendships. It exposed unhealthy habits. It forced growth that comfort never could. Seneca believed difficulties exist to test the spirit, just as fire tests gold. Without resistance, strength remains theoretical. Anyone can appear confident when life is easy. Anyone can appear patient when nothing goes wrong. Character reveals itself only under pressure. That is why loving yourself sometimes requires making decisions that temporarily make life harder. Going to the gym when staying in bed feels easier. Saving money when everyone else is spending. Studying while others waste hours chasing distractions, leaving relationships that damage your peace, apologizing when your ego wants to argue. Each decision feels uncomfortable in the moment, but discomfort is often the price of future freedom. There is a story about a successful businessman who spent decades building wealth. He owned beautiful homes, luxury cars, expensive watches, and everything he once dreamed of. Yet every evening, he dreaded going home. His family barely knew him. His children respected his money, but not his presence. His health was deteriorating. His friendships had become transactions. One afternoon, he met an elderly gardener sitting peacefully beneath a tree. The businessman asked what made him look so content, despite having so little. The gardener smiled. "I stopped chasing things that couldn't love me back." That sentence stayed with him. For the first time, he realized he had spent years collecting possessions while neglecting the person who owned them. The Stoics repeatedly warned that external success without internal peace is one of the greatest forms of failure. There is nothing wrong with ambition. There is nothing wrong with earning money. There is nothing wrong with pursuing excellence. The danger appears when achievement becomes your identity, because if success defines you, then failure destroys you. But if character defines you, success simply becomes a bonus. This shift changes everything. Instead of asking, "How can I impress people?" you begin asking, "How can I improve myself?" Instead of wondering whether people approve of you, you wonder whether you approve of yourself. That question is uncomfortable, because deep down, most people already know where they betray themselves. Maybe you ignore your health. Maybe you avoid difficult conversations. Maybe you procrastinate on dreams that matter. Maybe you keep forgiving people who repeatedly disrespect you. Maybe you criticize yourself more harshly than you would ever criticize someone you love. Imagine speaking to your younger self, the child who once believed anything was possible. Would that child recognize the way you speak to yourself today? Would they feel encouraged or heartbroken? Self-love also means protecting yourself from your own inner critic. Marcus Aurelius constantly reminded himself to replace destructive thoughts with rational ones, not blind optimism, not fantasy. Truth. If you fail at something, the truth is not that you are worthless. The truth is that you failed. Those are completely different statements. Failure describes an event. Worthlessness describes an identity. Never confuse the two. This single distinction has the power to rescue people from years of unnecessary suffering. Every great athlete loses. Every successful entrepreneur fails. Every respected leader makes mistakes. The difference is they refuse to let temporary outcomes define permanent identity. Stoicism teaches that your actions deserve evaluation. Your soul deserves respect. That balance creates emotional stability. There is another hidden reason people struggle to love themselves. They wait until they become perfect. They tell themselves, "I'll respect myself after I lose the weight, after I make more money, after I get married, after people finally recognize my value." But perfection never arrives. The finish line keeps moving. The Stoics believed virtue begins now, not someday. Now. You build confidence through today's decisions, not tomorrow's fantasies. Imagine planting an oak tree. You don't expect shade next week. You water it anyway. You protect it anyway. You trust the process. Self-love works exactly the same way. Every healthy choice plants another seed. Every disciplined action waters your future identity. Every honest conversation strengthens your roots. The transformation feels invisible at first. Then one day someone asks, "What changed about you? You seem calmer, more confident, less reactive." They notice the tree. They never saw the years spent growing the roots. People admire results. Stoicism teaches you to admire the process, because the process remains under your control. Results never fully do. There is tremendous freedom in that realization. When you stop trying to control outcomes, you gain more energy to control effort. Effort creates mastery. Mastery creates confidence. Confidence creates peace. Peace attracts opportunities that desperation never could. Have you ever noticed that the people desperately chasing love often struggle to find it, while those genuinely content with themselves naturally become attractive? That isn't magic. It is emotional psychology. Neediness asks for validation. Confidence offers presence. Neediness fears rejection. Confidence accepts reality. Neediness clings. Confidence chooses. One pushes people away, the other invites healthy relationships. This is why the Stoics encouraged voluntary solitude from time to time, not isolation. Reflection. Silence allows you to hear thoughts that constant distraction keeps hidden. Many people avoid quiet because they fear what they might discover. Unhealed wounds, ignored dreams, unspoken grief, hidden resentment. But healing begins exactly where avoidance ends. When you finally sit with yourself without running, without scrolling, without noise, without pretending, you begin meeting the person you have neglected for years. And surprisingly, that person often needs your compassion more than anyone else ever did. The greatest friendship you will ever build is the relationship with your own mind, because every success, every heartbreak, every celebration, every disappointment, you will experience all of it together. If your own mind becomes your enemy, life becomes exhausting. If your own mind becomes your ally, even hardship becomes survivable. There is one final lesson from the ancient Stoics that separates people who merely survive life from those who become truly unshakable. It explains why some people remain peaceful, even after devastating betrayal, while others spend decades trapped inside resentment. And once you understand this principle, you may never see yourself or the people around you the same way again. Betrayal has a strange way of changing people. Some become bitter, some become cold. Some spend years replaying old conversations, searching for answers they will never receive. But a small number of people become wiser. The difference is not what happened to them. The difference is what they decided the experience would mean. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself that the obstacle becomes the way. At first, those words seem impossible. How could rejection become a gift? How could failure become an advantage? How could loneliness become strength? Yet history repeatedly proves that the greatest transformations often begin where comfort ends. Think about the people you admire most. Very few were shaped by easy lives. They were shaped by hardship, loss, criticism, disappointment, pressure. The difference is they refused to let pain become their identity. Instead, they turned pain into wisdom. Imagine carrying a piece of charcoal in your hand. Every time you squeeze it harder, your hands become darker. Resentment works exactly the same way. The person who hurt you may have already moved on. Yet every day you continue holding the memory tightly. Who continues suffering? You do. The Stoics never said betrayal doesn't hurt. They simply refused to allow someone else's actions to control the rest of their lives. Forgiveness, according to Stoicism, is not saying what happened was acceptable. It is deciding that your future matters more than your past. That is one of the highest forms of self-love, because every day spent trapped inside anger is another day stolen from your own peace. Many people believe revenge brings closure. The Stoics believed character brings closure. Nothing frustrates those who underestimated you more than watching. You become peaceful, successful, disciplined, and impossible to manipulate. Not because you wanted revenge, because you finally stopped living for their opinion. This is where real freedom begins. The moment you stop asking, why didn't they choose me? And begin asking, how can I choose myself? That single shift changes the direction of an entire life. Choosing yourself means protecting your time, protecting your health, protecting your attention, protecting your standards, protecting your peace. Not out of arrogance, out of responsibility. Because if you abandon yourself, no one else can permanently rescue you. There is an old image often used by philosophers. Imagine your life as a garden. Every thought is a seed, every habit is water, every decision is sunlight. If you spend years watering insecurity, comparison, jealousy, and self-doubt, you cannot be surprised when those plants grow. But the beautiful truth is this: the garden can always be cultivated again. You are never too old to begin respecting yourself, never too broken to rebuild, never too late to change direction. Seneca wrote that while we waste time hesitating, life quietly passes us by. How many years have already disappeared because you waited for confidence before taking action? Confidence comes after action, not before. The first workout creates confidence. The first difficult conversation creates confidence. The first boundary creates confidence. The first morning you keep your promise to yourself creates confidence. Action teaches your mind what words never can. That is why discipline is one of the greatest forms of self-love. People often think discipline is punishment. The Stoics saw it differently. Discipline is evidence that your future matters enough to sacrifice temporary comfort. Imagine two versions of yourself standing side by side. One always chooses immediate pleasure. The other chooses long-term growth. 5 years later, they live completely different lives. Not because of luck, because of repeated daily decisions. Life rarely changes overnight. Identity changes quietly, one decision at a time, one habit at a time, one promise kept at a time. This is why your mornings matter. How you begin the day often determines how you experience the rest of it. Instead of reaching for your phone immediately, imagine beginning with gratitude, with reflection, with movement, with intentional silence. Those small moments remind your mind that you are leading your life instead of reacting to it. Marcus Aurelius began many mornings reminding himself that he would encounter difficult people, not to become pessimistic, to become prepared. Preparation reduces emotional shock. Prepared minds react with wisdom. Unprepared minds react with emotion. The same principle applies today. Expect criticism, expect setbacks, expect misunderstandings. Not because life is cruel, because life is real. When difficulty finally arrives, you no longer ask, "Why is this happening?" You simply ask, "What is the right response?" That is emotional maturity. The world constantly encourages emotional reactions. Instant outrage, instant judgment, instant revenge. Stoicism encourages something far more powerful. Pause, observe, choose. That tiny space between stimulus and response contains your greatest freedom. Most people never use it. They become prisoners of impulse. But every time you pause before reacting, you strengthen the muscle of self-mastery. Eventually, calm becomes your default instead of chaos. And people notice. Not because you speak louder, because you no longer need to. True confidence has a quiet presence. It enters the room without demanding attention. It listens more than it speaks. It values principles more than popularity. It remains kind without becoming weak. It remains humble without becoming invisible. That is the balance the Stoics spent their lives practicing. There is another truth many people avoid. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to you. Loving yourself sometimes means disappointing others, saying no, leaving unhealthy environments, walking away from manipulation, refusing to explain your boundaries to people committed to misunderstanding them. This is not cruelty, it is wisdom. A locked front door does not mean you hate your neighbors. It means you value your home. Your mind deserves the same protection. Guard what enters it. Guard who influences it. Guard how you speak to yourself. Because eventually, your inner dialogue becomes your outer life. Imagine meeting yourself 10 years from now. Would that future version thank you for today's decisions? Would they appreciate the excuses or the discipline? Would they admire the fear or the courage? That future self is being built right now, in this very moment. Every decision casts a vote for the person you are becoming. Choose carefully. You may never become perfect. The Stoics never expected perfection. They expected progress. Progress creates hope. Hope creates momentum. Momentum creates transformation. And transformation creates a life that no longer depends on external approval. One of the greatest signs that you finally love yourself is surprisingly simple. You stop trying to convince everyone else of your worth. You no longer chase people who keep running away. You no longer explain your value to those determined to overlook it. You no longer shrink your dreams to make insecure people comfortable. Instead, you quietly become the kind of person whose actions speak louder than any argument ever could. The world will still criticize you. Some people will misunderstand you. Others will leave. Life will continue bringing uncertainty, but something inside you will have changed forever. You will no longer mistake temporary rejection for permanent inadequacy. You will no longer confuse being alone with being abandoned. You will no longer sacrifice your peace just to avoid disappointing someone else, because you finally understand something that the Stoics knew centuries ago. The relationship you have with yourself sets the standard for every other relationship in your life. If you betray yourself, others will eventually do the same. If you respect yourself, the world slowly begins reflecting that standard back to you. This is not because the world suddenly becomes fair, it is because your choices become wiser, your boundaries become stronger, your standards become clearer, your confidence becomes quieter, and your peace becomes unshakable. So before you search for someone else to complete you, complete the promises you made to yourself. Before you ask the world to believe in you, become someone you believe in. Before you demand respect, live in a way that earns your own.
Because at the end of your life you will not spend every day with your friends. You will not spend every day with your coworkers. You will not spend every day with your followers. You will spend every single day with yourself. Make that relationship your strongest one. Everything else grows from there. If today's message spoke to something deep inside you, don't let it end here. Choose one promise you have been avoiding and keep it today. Not tomorrow. Not next Monday. Today. It may seem like a small action. But small actions repeated consistently build extraordinary lives. Write in the comments. Today I choose myself. That simple commitment may become the first step toward the strongest version of you that has ever existed. And if you want more timeless wisdom from Marcus Aurelius, Seneca, Epictetus, and the Stoic philosophers that helps you build unshakable confidence, emotional control, discipline, and inner peace, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications. Remember, the world changes constantly. People come and go. Success rises and falls. But the person who learns to love themselves through discipline, wisdom, and character carries something that no one can ever take away. That is real freedom. And once you find it, you never have to chase your worth again.